My name is Alex. I'm 31 years old, and I own a construction company. It's a life I built with my own two hands, from the ground up, literally. For most of my life, my family saw those hands as useful for two things: fixing what my brother broke and reaching for my wallet to bail him out. So when I got the text message 2 weeks before Christmas, I knew it wasn't about what it said. It was about what it didn't say. The message was from a group chat my mother had created, titled Family Peace. It was just her, my dad, and me. My brother, Leo, wasn't in it, which was the first red flag. The text itself was simple, almost elegant in its passive aggression. Hi Alex. Dad and I have been talking. There's been so much stress and tension lately, and we think for the sake of peace, it's best if we all just skip Christmas this year. We can reconnect in the new year when things are calmer. I read it once. Then twice. The word swam in front of me: stress. Tension. Peace. They were talking about me. I was the stress. I was the tension. My refusal to keep funding my brother's lifestyle was the obstacle to their peace. They expected me to argue. To plead. To ask what I did wrong. They were setting a trap, positioning me as the family problem so they could graciously offer a solution that would inevitably involve me opening my checkbook again. They had no idea that for the first time in my life, I held all the cards. They thought I was a handyman with a beat-up truck. They didn't know about the business, the savings, the life I'd built entirely without them. So I typed back a single, perfect word. Perfect. The silence that followed was more deafening than any argument we'd ever had. Before I continue and tell you how that one word led to the biggest confrontation of our lives and exposed a secret I'd kept for almost a decade, I want you to do me a favor. If you've ever felt like the family ATM, the scapegoat, or the one person expected to sacrifice everything for everyone else's comfort, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had to choose your own peace over family drama, because my story is for you. My childhood home wasn't a bad place if you were my younger brother, Leo. For him, it was a 5-star resort with endless room service and a concierge, our parents, who catered to his every whim. For me, it was more like the staff quarters. I was the quiet, responsible one, the one who learned early on that praise was a resource as finite as cash, and it was all allocated to Leo's account. It started small. Leo would get the latest video game console for his birthday. I'd get a new set of flannel shirts for school. He wanted to try hockey, so my dad bought him a full set of top-of-the-line gear. When I wanted to join the school's woodworking club, my dad scoffed and said, "Why would you want to mess around with sawdust? Go get a real hobby." My hobby was working. At 14, I got a job bussing tables at a local diner so I could buy my own tools. I started with a cheap, second-hand circular saw and a drill. In our damp, unfinished basement, surrounded by the smell of earth and mildew, I found my sanctuary. I built bookshelves, a wobbly but functional workbench, and small repair projects for neighbors. Each dollar I earned, each joint I perfected, was a quiet act of rebellion. Leo, meanwhile, was collecting experiences funded by the bank of mom and dad. There was his photography phase, which required a $2,000 camera he used for a month. Then came his music producer phase, which meant a brand new iMac and expensive software that gathered dust. My parents called it encouraging his creative spirit when I used my own money to buy a used pickup truck at 17, a rusty but reliable Ford. My dad just shook his head. "A money pit," he declared. "You should be saving for college," but they weren't saving for my college. They were saving for Leo's. It was an unspoken truth in our house. Leo was the investment. He was charming, popular, and floated through life on a cloud of charisma. I was the utility. Dependable, sturdy, and utterly taken for granted. The pattern was set. My high school graduation gift was a firm handshake from my dad and my mom telling me they were proud I'd found my way. Leo's graduation gift, 2 years later, was a new car and a fully funded gap year to find himself in Europe. While he was posting photos from Barcelona and Rome, I was working 2 jobs, landscaping during the day, stocking shelves at a grocery store at night, saving for community college courses in construction management. They never asked about my classes. They never asked about my work. Their calls were always a prelude to a request. "Alex, the dishwasher is making a weird noise, can you look at it?" "Alex, Leo's car needs an oil change, and he's just so busy." I was the family handyman, the built-in support system for the golden child. The last time I asked for anything was when my truck's transmission finally gave out. I had most of the money for a replacement, but I was about $500 short. I swallowed my pride and asked my parents for a loan. My dad looked at me with a pained expression. "Alex, we're a little tight right now. Leo needs some help with his deposit on that new apartment." The next day, I saw my mom post on social media about the brand new espresso machine they bought because Leo had developed a taste for lattes. That was the day something inside me finally clicked into place. I wasn't just overlooked. I was invisible. And from that day forward, I decided to use that invisibility to my advantage. My real life began the day I stopped expecting anything from my family. I moved out of the basement and into a tiny apartment on the other side of town. The freedom was intoxicating. I continued my coursework at night and worked for a small, local construction firm during the day. That's where I met Mr. Henderson. He was the owner, a man in his late 60s with hands like leather and eyes that saw everything. He was tough, old school, and didn't tolerate laziness. He saw something in me that my own father never did: potential. He saw how I organized the worksite, how I read blueprints like novels, how I stayed late to learn the electrical and plumbing work, not because I had to, but because I wanted to understand the whole process. He started giving me more responsibility, teaching me how to bid on jobs, manage crews, and handle difficult clients. "You've got a good head for this, kid," he'd say, clapping me on the shoulder with a force that almost knocked me over. "You don't just see the wooden nails. You see the home." He became the father figure I never had. My actual father only called when a gutter needed cleaning. Mr. Henderson called to discuss business strategy. My mother would text to remind me about Leo's birthday. Mr. Henderson would leave me books on business management and accounting on my desk. For 5 years, I was a sponge. I soaked up every piece of knowledge he offered. I saved money with a ferocity that bordered on obsession. I drove my old truck until it was more rust than metal. I lived in that tiny apartment, my furniture a collection of cast-offs and things I built myself. I didn't go on vacations. I didn't buy fancy clothes. Every spare dollar went into a business account. My family remained oblivious. To them, I was just Alex, who works in construction. They imagined me hauling drywall for someone else, earning a modest hourly wage. They never once asked about the company name, my role, or my ambitions. The disconnect was staggering. They would complain about the cost of a plumber while I was, at that very moment, managing a team of 6 on a full-scale kitchen remodel. They had no idea. It was during this time that I met Sarah. We met at a coffee shop where I was poring over blueprints on a Saturday morning. She was a graphic designer and was fascinated by the intricate drawings. She asked questions my family never thought to ask. What was I building? What did the different symbols mean? What was the hardest part of my job? She saw the passion, not just the labor. She was the first person I told about my dream. The first person I showed my business plan to. The first person to know about the growing sum in my business account. Her belief in me was a revelation. "You're building an empire, Alex," she'd said, her eyes shining. And they have no clue when Mr. Henderson announced his retirement, he made me an offer that changed my life. He offered to sell me the business, the client list, the equipment, the company name, for a price that was criminally low. "It's not a handout," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's an investment. I'm investing in you with my savings and a small business loan." He co-signed for. I became the owner of Apex Builders. I kept it a secret from my family. It wasn't a game, it was self-preservation. I knew, with absolute certainty, that the moment they knew I had a successful business, it would no longer be mine. It would become the family emergency fund. It would become Leo's safety net. So I let them believe I was still just the guy with the tool belt, the convenient son they could call when something broke. I was playing the long game, waiting for the day when the truth would be more powerful than their expectations. That day was coming sooner than I thought. The digital silence after my perfect text was profound. It lasted for exactly 1 hour. Then, my phone lit up with a call from my mother. I let it ring twice, took a deep breath, and answered. "Hi, Mom." Her voice was laced with a sickly sweet, concerned tone that I knew was pure performance. "Alex, honey. I got your text. Are you okay?" The implication was clear. A normal, loving son would be devastated at the prospect of missing a family Christmas. My calm acceptance was, to her, a sign of a deep emotional wound. "I'm fine, Mom. Like you said, things have been stressful. Taking a year off sounds like a good idea." Peaceful. I deliberately used her word against her. There was a pause on the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head as she recalibrated her strategy. "Well, yes," she stammered. "It's just... I thought you'd be disappointed. We were just trying to protect you, you know? Your brother, he feels like you're angry with him all the time, and it creates such tension. We wanted to spare you the discomfort." It was masterful gaslighting. Suddenly, the entire conflict was my fault. It wasn't about Leo's irresponsibility or their enabling of it. It was about my anger. My discomfort. I was the problem they were trying to solve by benevolently excluding me. "There's no discomfort on my end, Mom," I said, my voice even and calm. This was a new Alex, one she hadn't met before. The old Alex would have gotten defensive, would have taken the bait. If Leo feels tension, that's something he should probably talk to me about directly. But I accept your decision. A quiet Christmas sounds great. I could feel her frustration mounting. This wasn't going according to plan. I was supposed to be begging. I was supposed to be asking, what can I do to fix this? That was my usual role. Instead, I was agreeing. Happily. Another long pause. "Your father is very worried," she said, shifting tactics. "He thinks you're pulling away from the family." "I'm just agreeing to the plan you both proposed," I said, the simple logic of it feeling like a superpower. "You wanted peace, and I'm giving it to you." The conversation ended soon after with a flustered goodbye from her. But that was just the opening salvo. An hour later, a text from my dad. "Your mother is very upset. Call me." I ignored it. Then came the emails, the voicemails. The narrative was always the same. My coldness, my refusal to engage in the drama they had initiated, was proof of how difficult I was being. The grand irony was lost on them. They had texted me to cancel Christmas to create a problem, and my refusal to see it as a problem had become an even bigger one. Sarah watched the whole thing unfold with a knowing look. "They're panicking," she said, wrapping her arms around me as I stared at my phone. "They played their big card, and you just folded with a smile. They don't know what to do when you're not playing the victim." She was right. They had overplayed their hand so dramatically, believing I was the same broke, eager-to-please kid I'd always been. They had no idea that my silence wasn't weakness. It was power. It was the calm before a storm they themselves had summoned. The final, desperate escalation came a week later, in the form of a call from my father. This time, his tone wasn't worried. It was angry. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing, Alex, but it stops now. We have a real problem here, and you need to stop sulking and step up." The trap was finally being sprung. The real problem was exactly what I had suspected it would be. It wasn't emotional, it was practical. It was the kind of problem they had always outsourced to me. "The furnace is making a rattling sound, and the pilot light keeps going out," my dad said, his voice stripped of all pretense. "And I think the roof is leaking in the attic. There's a stain on the ceiling in the guest room." He said it with the casual authority of a man ordering a subordinate to fix a mess. There was no pleasy no could you possibly. It was a demand, cloaked as a statement of fact. For years, this was my cue. I would have sighed, cancelled my weekend plans, and spent the next 48 hours in their dusty attic and damp basement, patching things up for the price of a half-hearted thanks, but this time was different. Wow, that sounds serious, Dad, I said, my voice full of professional concern. Especially with the cold weather coming. You should get someone to look at that right away. The line went quiet. I had deviated from the script again. I wasn't offering to come over, I was offering advice. What do you mean, get someone? He sputtered. I'm telling you. You're the one who knows how to fix this stuff. I'm really busy with work right now, Dad, I said, which was true. December was a frantic month for construction. But I can have my company take a look. I can send a crew over tomorrow to do a full assessment. He was confused. Your company? What are you talking about? Just bring your tools over on Saturday. I took a deep breath. This was it. The moment of truth. Dad, I own the company. Apex Builders. I can't just come over. We have protocols, insurance liabilities. We have to do it by the book. I'll schedule an official inspection. The silence on the other end of the line was so complete I thought he might have hung up. I heard a faint, muffled sound, like he was covering the receiver and speaking to my mother. Then he came back on, his voice a full octave higher. You own it? Since when? A few years now, I said simply. I'll have my assistant schedule the inspection for tomorrow morning. We'll send you a formal quote for any necessary repairs. I hung up before he could respond. The next morning, I didn't send a crew. I went myself. But I didn't show up in jeans and a t-shirt, driving my old personal truck. I pulled into their driveway in my brand new work truck, emblazoned with the Apex Builders logo. I wore a company-branded jacket and carried a professional-grade tablet and toolkit. I walked to the door and rang the bell. My mother opened it, her face a mask of bewilderment. My father and Leo were standing in the living room behind her. They all stared at me, then at the truck, then back at me. They looked like they were seeing a ghost. I spent the next hour conducting the most thorough inspection their house had ever seen. I went into the attic, documented the water damage from the failing roof flashing. I went into the basement, analyzed the cracked heat exchanger in the ancient furnace, a serious carbon monoxide risk. I was polite, detached, and professional. When I was done, I sat down at their dining room table, the same table where I'd been served smaller portions than my brother, and tapped my findings into my tablet. Okay, I said, turning the screen to face them. Here's the situation. The roof needs significant repairs around the chimney flashing and several valleys. And the furnace, it's done. It's a hazard. It needs a full replacement. My dad just stared at me. So, what's that going to take? A weekend. I swiveled the tablet back, finalized the numbers, and turned it around again. The total for the roof repair and a new high-efficiency furnace, including parts and labor, comes to $22,500. The air left the room. My mother gasped and put a hand to her chest. Leo, who had been smirking from the sofa, sat bolt upright. My father's face turned a dark shade of red. 22,000, he choked out. Are you insane? That's a joke, right? You're going to do it for us. It wasn't a question. It was a command. And my answer would change everything. I looked my father straight in the eye, my expression unreadable. The entire room was frozen, caught in the gravity of that $22,000 number. My mother looked like she was about to faint. Leo was gaping, his mouth slightly open, the smirk completely gone. He was finally seeing me not as his doormat brother, but as a man who held a power he couldn't comprehend. No, I said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the center of the room like a bomb. That's the price. That's what it costs for my company, Apex Builders, to do the work. My father slammed his hand down on the dining table, making the salt and pepper shakers jump. Don't be ridiculous. You're our son. You don't charge your own family. After everything we've done for you. The sheer audacity of that last sentence almost made me laugh. Everything they'd done for me. The years of neglect, of being the second choice, of my achievements being ignored while Leo's failures were bankrolled, all coalesced into a single moment of crystalline clarity. I stood up from the table, my movement slow and deliberate. Everything you've done for me. I repeated, my voice dangerously calm. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the thousands you spent on Leo's hockey gear, his cameras, his computers. Let's talk about the car you bought him for graduation, or the trip to Europe. Let's talk about the down payment on his apartment, or the money you gave him to start that lifestyle brand that folded in 6 months. When was the last time you gave me anything, Dad? A handshake at graduation? A lecture about my money pit truck? My mother started to cry softly. Alex, don't be like this. No, I'm just getting started, I said, turning to her. When I needed $500 to fix my transmission so I could get to my 2 jobs to pay for my own school, you were a little tight, but you had enough for a new espresso machine for Leo. Do you have any idea what I was doing while he was finding himself in Europe? I was working 60-hour weeks. I was saving every single penny. I built this business with my own sweat and my own money, with zero help from either of you. I pointed a finger at Leo. He thinks I'm the source of tension in this family. The tension is that the free ride is over. The ATM is closed. Leo finally found his voice. You're being selfish. They're our parents. You'd let their roof leak. I'm not letting them do anything, I countered, turning back to my father. I'm offering a professional service at a fair market price. The same price I would charge any client. This is my business. These are my employees. This is my livelihood, the one I built while you were busy underwriting his. I picked up my tablet from the table. I'll email you the official quote. My company's schedule for pre-holiday work is almost full, so I'd advise you to make a decision quickly. You can pay in installments, but we require 50% upfront to secure the materials and the crew. I walked towards the front door, the 3 of them watching me, paralyzed in stunned disbelief. I paused with my hand on the doorknob and looked back. You wanted peace for Christmas. You wanted to skip the family drama. Well, this is me respecting that. This is business. It has nothing to do with family. So I walked out the door and didn't look back. The feeling of driving away wasn't anger or even sadness. It was the terrifying, exhilarating thrill of pure, unadulterated freedom. The fallout was immediate and exactly as I'd predicted. My phone began to buzz before I had even pulled out of their neighborhood. It was my mother. I ignored the call. Then came the barrage of texts, a rapid-fire assault of guilt and manipulation. From my mother, I can't believe you would speak to your father that way. You've broken his heart, and then we raised you to be a good man, not a cold, heartless businessman. I don't know who you've become. From my father, it was more direct, more threatening. You will regret this, Alex. Family is everything, and you are throwing yours away for money. I read them, a strange sense of detachment washing over me. These were the words that used to cripple me with guilt, that would have sent me scurrying back, apology in hand. Now, they felt hollow, like echoes from a life I no longer lived. When I got home, Sarah was waiting for me. She could tell by the look on my face that the confrontation had happened. I told her everything, from the inspection to the quote to the final standoff. She listened intently, her expression shifting from anger on my behalf to immense pride. You did it, she said softly, taking my hand. You finally stood up to them. All of it. I am so proud of you. Her validation was like a balm on a wound I didn't even realize was still so raw. That evening, Leo tried a different tactic. He sent me a long, rambling message about how I had humiliated our parents and how my success had clearly made me arrogant. You have this big, successful company, he wrote, and you can't even help your own family? It's sick. Mom and Dad are talking about having to take out a loan. A loan, Alex. Because their own son is extorting them. The word extorting was rich, coming from him. I typed a simple reply, you should get a job and help them pay for it. The digital silence that followed that message was glorious. But the manipulation campaign was just getting started. A few days later, I got a call from my Aunt Carol, my mom's sister. She was always the one person in the family who seemed to see the dynamic for what it was. Her tone was gentle. "Alex, honey, your mother called me." She was hysterical, I can imagine, I said dryly. "She's telling everyone that you came into a fortune and now you're refusing to help them, that you'd rather see them freeze in the dark than lift a finger," Carol said. "I just wanted you to know what they're saying. And for what it's worth." I told her she's been reaping what she's been sowing with you and Leo for 30 years. Hearing that from her, from someone inside the family bubble, was another crack in the wall of my self-doubt. It wasn't just me. It wasn't just Sarah. Others saw it, too. The guilt campaign didn't work. The emotional blackmail failed. My parents were faced with a version of me they didn't know how to handle. I wasn't their compliant handyman anymore. I was the owner of Apex Builders, and my boundaries were as solid as the foundations I built. Supported by Sarah, with a validating text from my aunt saved on my phone, I held firm. I didn't answer their calls. I didn't respond to their manipulative texts. I was creating my own peace, not on their terms, but on mine. And they were about to discover the real-world consequences of their choices. My parents, blinded by pride and rage, refused to accept my quote. The idea of paying me, the son they had dismissed and ignored for 3 decades, was a humiliation they couldn't stomach. So they did exactly what I knew they would do. They sought out a cheaper, easier solution. My Aunt Carol called me about a week after the confrontation, her voice a mix of frustration and gossip. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "Your father hired some guy he found on a community Facebook page. Some chuck-in-8 truck who promised he could fix the roof and patch the furnace for a fraction of your price. Cash deal, no questions asked." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. It wasn't jealousy, it was dread. I knew those kinds of operators. They preyed on people looking for a bargain, doing shoddy, often dangerous work and then disappearing when things went wrong. "That's a terrible idea," I said. "The furnace needs a full replacement by a licensed professional, not a patch job. And a cash deal means he's uninsured." I told them that, "Alex," Carol said with a sigh. "But your father said he wasn't going to be robbed by his own flesh and blood, that they are so determined to prove you wrong that they're willing to risk everything, and risk it they did." The first heavy snow of the season came a few days later. In the middle of the night, I got a frantic call from Aunt Carol again. "The guy made it worse, Alex. Much worse. The patch on the roof failed, and now there's water actively dripping into the living room. The furnace is completely dead, and the fire department had to come because the guy messed with the gas line and there was a leak. They've red-tagged it. They have no heat, and there's a hole in their ceiling." The consequences had arrived, swiftly and brutally. Their attempt to save face had resulted in a catastrophe. They were now facing not just the original repairs, but water damage remediation, drywall repair, and a far more urgent and expensive furnace replacement. They were forced to check into a hotel. The next day, humbled and desperate, my father had to do what he had so vehemently resisted. He had to call a different, reputable HVAC company. The quote they gave him was $3,000 higher than mine had been, and that didn't even include the extensive roof and water damage repairs. They had to take out a high-interest emergency loan, a financial anchor that would weigh them down for years. While their drama was unfolding, Sarah and I were having the quietest, most peaceful December of my life. We bought our own Christmas tree and decorated it while listening to old holiday music. We cooked dinner together. I spent time with Mr. Henderson, who listened to the whole story and simply nodded, a proud glint in his eye. "Sometimes," he said, "people need to learn a lesson the hard way. The most loving thing you can do is let them." Christmas Day arrived, and for the first time ever, it wasn't filled with passive-aggressive comments, forced smiles, or the underlying tension of Leo's latest drama. It was just peaceful. Sarah and I exchanged gifts, went for a walk in the snow with our dog, and spent the afternoon with our chosen family, our close friends who celebrated my success and supported my decisions. As I sat there, surrounded by genuine warmth and laughter, I realized I wasn't missing a thing. I wasn't mourning the loss of the family Christmas I never had. I was healing. I was building a new life, one with a foundation of respect, not obligation. The silence from my parents wasn't a punishment anymore, it was a gift. The new year came and went. The silence from my parents continued, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was no longer the angry, strategic silence of a tantrum, but the heavy, hollow silence of defeat. Aunt Carol kept me updated. They had moved back into their house, but it was a miserable existence. The financial strain of the loan was immense, casting a pall over everything. Leo, stripped of his safety net, was apparently being forced to look for a real job for the first time in his life, a prospect that filled him with bitter resentment towards me. I focused on my own life. Apex Builders was thriving, and Sarah and I were starting to talk about buying a house of our own, one that I would build, of course. I was finally shedding the skin of the person I used to be, the boy who craved a crumb of approval from people who were incapable of giving it. Then, one evening in late February, an unknown number flashed on my phone. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" There was a pause, and then a voice I barely recognized, gravelly and small. "Alex?" It's Dad." I was so taken aback I didn't respond for a moment. His voice was devoid of its usual bluster and authority. It was just the voice of an old man. Can we talk?" he asked. "Just for a few minutes. I could meet you for coffee." "Wherever you want." My first instinct was to say no. To protect the peace I had fought so hard to win. But there was a fragility in his voice I had never heard before. It wasn't a trap. It felt like a surrender. "Okay," I said, my own voice cautious. "The coffee shop on Main Street." Tomorrow morning at 10. When I walked into the coffee shop the next day, he was already there, sitting at a small table in the corner. He looked older than he had just a few months ago. The arrogance was gone from his posture. He just looked tired. He stood up awkwardly when he saw me. We ordered our coffees and sat in an uncomfortable silence for a few moments before he finally spoke, his eyes fixed on the tabletop. "We were wrong," he said, the words coming out in a rush, as if he was afraid he'd lose the nerve to say them. I was wrong. He looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw not anger or disappointment, but a deep, profound shame. "We never saw you, son. We really didn't. We saw a tool. A resource. A solution to problems. We saw Leo's future, and we just assumed you'd always be there to prop it up." He took a shaky breath. "When you stood in the living room and laid it all out, all the things we'd done for him and not for you, it was like being struck by lightning. You were right. About all of it. And my pride, my stupid, stubborn pride, it cost us. It cost us a fortune, but more than that, it cost me my son." He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He wasn't asking for money. He was just confessing. It was the most honest, vulnerable conversation I had ever had with my father. It was imperfect. It was clumsy. But it was real. "I'm sorry, Alex," he said, his voice cracking. "For not seeing you. For not being the father you deserved." It wasn't a magic wand. It didn't erase 30 years of neglect. But it was a start. A tiny, fragile, tentative beginning. The coffee with my dad wasn't a resolution, it was an opening. It was the first crack of light in a room that had been dark for my entire life. I didn't rush to embrace him. I didn't pretend that his one apology could magically heal decades of wounds. Instead, I cautiously accepted his offering for what it was, a first step. We started meeting for coffee once a week. The conversations were stilted at first, full of awkward silences. We were like two strangers learning a new language. The language of mutual respect. I set clear boundaries from the start. We would not talk about money. We would not talk about my business, other than him asking how my day was. And we would absolutely not talk about Leo. This was about him and me. For the first time, he asked me about my life. Not about what I could fix, but about who I was. He asked about Sarah, about my friends, about the houses I was building. He listened, really listened, with a curiosity I never knew he possessed. He told me stories about his own father, about the pressures he felt as a young man, things that didn't excuse his behavior but provided a sliver of context. My mother and Leo remained distant. My mom, according to Aunt Carol, felt too ashamed to face me. She was trapped between her loyalty to Leo and the dawning, painful realization that they had monumentally failed me. Leo was simply angry. In his world, I was the villain who had dismantled his comfortable life. I was okay with that. My healing didn't depend on their participation. One day, my dad asked if he could see one of my projects. I hesitated, but then agreed. I took him to a custom home we were framing on a hill overlooking the city. We walked through the skeleton of the house, the air smelling of fresh-cut lumber. I explained the architecture, the load-bearing walls, the complex truss system in the roof. He touched the raw wood, his eyes full of a kind of wonder. "You built this," he said, his voice quiet with awe. All of this came out of your head in that moment. He wasn't seeing a handyman. He wasn't seeing a resource. He was seeing his son. He was seeing my passion, my skill, my creation. He was finally seeing me. The journey to this point was the hardest thing I've ever done. It forced me to confront the painful truth of my childhood and to risk complete alienation from the only family I had ever known. The text message that was meant to put me in my place, to bully me into submission for the sake of a false peace, had ironically triggered the events that led to real peace. True peace wasn't the absence of conflict. True peace was the presence of boundaries. It was the quiet confidence of knowing my own worth, independent of anyone else's approval. I had to tear down the old, rotten structure of my family dynamic to build something new, something healthier, on a solid foundation. If my story resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight for your own peace and self-respect, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about navigating life's challenges. And please, share your own story of setting a difficult but necessary boundary in the comments below. Remember, you are the architect of your own life. Don't ever let anyone else tell you how to build it.